The year is 2016. We are well into the hybrid engine era, full of brilliant racing, with Hamilton winning the last 2 championships with Mercedes, becoming a 3-time world champ. Williams finally looked like a decent team again. I wonder how long that would last. But more importantly, F1 had decided it needed more sex appeal to bring in a bigger audience, so they decided to add dildos to every car. So it was safe to say it was a very exciting time for F1. But my oh my, were we not prepared for what 2016 had to offer for us. At the end of the season, Rosberg clinched the title with 385 points to Lewis Hamilton's 380, winning his one and only championship before retiring from the sport. But quite significantly, under this whole Silver Arrows war, a new legend was born. This is the 2016 Spanish Grand Prix. Now, first of all, before we talk about the Spanish Grand Prix in 2016, there are a few things you need to know. First of all, very sadly, everyone's favourite driver, Will the Lad Stevens, had been dropped coming into this season, so we wouldn't get to see his glorious results, such as a DNF in Austria and 18th in Japan. He really was the dog's bollocks, coming 21st out of 20. However, the Spanish GP would be the 5th Grand Prix of this season that was very much dominated by Mercedes. And I say Mercedes, but it had been Rosberg wiping the floor. He had won each and every race, all 4 of them, up until this point. Meaning, he actually led the championship with 100 points, with Lewis Hamilton behind only on 57. So this really was a make or break race for Hamilton. If Rosberg won another race, the title would very much be slipping away from Hamilton's hands. So tensions were very high coming into Spain to make sure that that didn't happen. However, elsewhere, Russia had been developing a new powerful weapon that they had been testing out in China and Russia, called the torpedo.
I've got the manager by the scruff of the neck. I've gone, give me my fucking chips. Bang! The manager's on the floor. Security's come over. I've gone, fuck off. 3 of them all knocked out. Riot police come in. I thought, oh, let's all have it. All of it looking like this. Get your hands up in the air.
Now, due to these immaculate results in China and Russia, it meant that he was dropped coming into the Spanish Grand Prix. And who was taking his place? It would be the new upcoming talent, the 18-year-old of Max Verstappen, to try and see what else they had going on for them in their driver academy. Then, one final thing from me that you need to know is that there are 11 teams on the grid, so there were 22 cars this season, and sadly we still had the Sector 3 chicane in Spain, which meant you're going to notice there are a lot less overtakes than you get now. So going into qualifying, was there anything out of the ordinary? Well, the only thing that really happened that was a bit of a whoa was that Felipe Massa got dropped out in the first part of qualifying 18th. However, bar that, it was pretty much the status quo, with Hamilton taking pole position with Rosberg following right behind him in 2nd place. Mercedes 1-2. The only potential difference was that Red Bull qualified 3rd and 4th with Ricciardo 3rd, Verstappen 4th. And Ferraris of Raikkonen 5th and Vettel 6th. So considering up until this point, Ferrari looked a little bit better than Red Bull. You could say that was a little bit different, but realistically, it was Mercedes the top dog. Then you had Ferrari and Red Bull clear of everyone else. So let the race begin. 5 red lights and away we go. With Hamilton actually getting a good initial release off the line. However, Rosberg going down that long straight into turn 1 was able to get behind Hamilton and swoop round the outside and take 1st place going into turn 1. Further back on the grid, and Kimi Raikkonen had a dreadful start, dropping down to having to fight with Bottas. However, Vettel, his teammate, had a brilliant start, getting up to 6th all the way to fighting for 4th with Verstappen. It looked like Vettel had the move done. However, Verstappen round turn 3 was able to again just get enough traction and keep ahead of Vettel. Then, out of turn 3, something happened.
And it's Nico Rosberg and Hamilton's onto the grass, and Hamilton's had a massive crash, and he's crashed into his teammate. The 2 Mercedes come together as Hamilton cover his hand.
both Mercedes were out of the race, bringing out the safety car after only 3 corners of the race. Meaning, for the first time this season, a Mercedes would not win a race. Oh, and fun fact I didn't tell you before the crash, while all of this was going on, just before the safety car got called out, after Vettel didn't have the best of turn 3s, Carlos Sainz took very much advantage of that, meaning that he got up to 3rd place. So, technically, while the safety car was out, and up until lap 8, the standings were a Red Bull top 3, with Ricciardo 1st, Verstappen 2nd, and Carlos Sainz 3rd. And in front of his home crowd, they were very excited. But like I mentioned, this wouldn't last long, as after the safety car came in on lap 4, and then by lap 8, Vettel had gotten past Carlos Sainz for 3rd, with Kimi Räikkönen, his teammate, following closely behind a lap later, although he did have a bit of a scuff with Sainz. And my friends, this is where the race gets interesting. Well, a little bit of a lie, but this is where the pit stop started to come in. Now, Spain, it wasn't your normal one-stop strategy this weekend. It was very much a 2-stop or a 3-stop. And we would start to see the first signs of potentially what strategies they would start to go on, with Daniel Ricciardo being the first of the front runners to pit on lap 12, with Verstappen coming in a lap later on lap 13, and then Vettel in the Ferrari came in on lap 16. Now, after these pit stops, nothing crazy happened. They all went on to the medium compound, and they came out as they followed in, with Ricciardo in 1st, Verstappen in 2nd, Vettel in 3rd, and Raikkonen in 4th. Oh, and by the way, it very much was these top 4 and everyone else, as Bottas, who was in 5th, at this point already had quite a big gap. And, spoiler alert, but it's not something crazy in the race, by the end of the race, technically, I'll get to why technically, the gap was around 40 to 50 seconds to Bottas, just showing, even though the Red Bulls and Ferraris were brilliant, because they were still so far ahead of the rest of the field, bloody hell were the Mercedes rapid in 2016, because they were even quicker than that. But 6 laps later, on lap 22, sadly for Nico Hülkenberg, his race would end, with him retiring from the race. And over the next few laps, this is where the strategies would start to come into play, with Ricciardo leading, Verstappen right behind him, and Vettel also very close to Verstappen. It very much was a case of, it's going to be hard to overtake, what do we do? Well, Ricciardo thought he had enough in the bag to do this, being the first of the front runners to pit on lap 28 for a new set of soft compound tyres, meaning he would almost definitely have to pit for another set. Sebastian Vettel, thinking he'd cover off the race leader, followed him in on lap 30 again for a new set of soft tyres. But crucially for Verstappen and Raikkonen, they decided to hold on to their tyres a little bit extra, with them going a few extra laps, with Verstappen coming in on lap 34 for his final set of medium compound tyres, with Kimi Räikkönen coming in on lap 35 following Verstappen's pit stop strategy. So now we had a change at the front, with Ricciardo keeping his first place, but Vettel now crucially in 2nd, with quite a big gap, around 10-ish seconds to Verstappen in 3rd place and Raikkonen in 4th. It was now game on to see how much of a gap Vettel and Ricciardo could make before they had to pit. And it seemed as if it was very much looking good for the 3-stop strategy, with Sebastian Vettel coming in on lap 39 for his final pit stop, and Ricciardo coming in on lap 43. And at this point, when Ricciardo pitted, Vettel had already made up enough ground to overtake Ricciardo from his strategy, meaning that now it was Verstappen with Raikkonen very close behind, less than a second, so Verstappen had to worry about Raikkonen, with Vettel only around 7 to 8 seconds off from these two, with Ricciardo a few seconds adrift as well. They would almost definitely catch up to the top 2. But for Verstappen, it was all fun and games worrying about the future, with potentially a very fast Vettel and Ricciardo on his backside with fresher sets of tyres. However, he had his own issues, as I mentioned, Raikkonen was only a second behind Verstappen, so he had to concentrate to the fullest to make sure Raikkonen couldn't pounce on any mistakes. Just remember, this was Verstappen's first race at Red Bull. He had a chance to win the race. The pressure must have been so immense, but he kept his cool and was able to keep Raikkonen behind for now. Elsewhere on the grid, and sadly for the homeboy of Fernando Alonso, his GP2 engine gave up on him, meaning he would have to retire from the race on lap 47. And by lap 55, it was getting tense with the two battles, as Raikkonen was very much in Verstappen's DRS zone, trying to get closer and closer to see if he could go for a move. And you had the same with Vettel and Ricciardo, which now looked like Vettel was slowing down Ricciardo. However, crucially, they were still catching up to the front two. So both these two-way fights could end up being a four-way scrap for the win come the end of the race. However, for Ricciardo, it was so crucial that he got past Vettel, as yes, they were only 4 seconds behind, but if he was stuck at the back of that train, there was no chance that he would get that race win. And, like I mentioned, it was very hard to get an overtake around Spain, and hey, who better to try than Daniel Ricciardo?
Gives Ricciardo the opportunity to fight Sebastian Vettel. He is going to go for it down into turn one. What a move! He has to go wide, sadly. Rejoins the track. He's still going to carry on the scrap.
And what did he do? He did his signature bloody dive bomb. This overtake had to work for Daniel Ricciardo, and sadly it just didn't pan out. And with Sebastian Vettel having to scrap him all around turn 1, 2 and 3, both of them lost a lot of time, meaning by the end of this scrap they were around 6 to 7 seconds behind Raikkonen and Verstappen, meaning their chances of winning a race were both done. And by the way, this was when Vettel gave quite an iconic radio message.
If I don't avoid that, he's just going straight to my car. Honestly, what are we doing? Racing or ping pong?
And to put more salt into Daniel Ricciardo's wounds, well, he was sitting in 4th, and that was until the penultimate lap where he got a puncture. Now, luckily for him, there was such a big gap. Do you remember that gap I mentioned to you technically? And here's why. There was such a huge gap to Bottas that he was able to get into the pits and still cross the line in 4th. Crucially for Red Bull, this didn't matter, as come lap 66, the final lap, Verstappen still had Raikkonen a second behind, just keeping him at bay. With Vettel still a few seconds off, all Verstappen had to do was get across that finish line. And soak it in, Red Bull, because that is exactly what Verstappen did, winning the 2016 Spanish Grand Prix. His first race for Red Bull, and in the process becoming the youngest F1 driver to win a race at 18 years old. Now, if you want to get technical, I think it was 18 years, 222 days. I'll fact check that. Winning on his first Red Bull race and very much solidifying his name into F1 history. What an achievement. Oh, and for the person he replaced, well, a small win for Kvyat, as he did end up with fastest lap. Now, at this point in F1, there was no fastest lap point, so it meant nothing, but I guess congratulations. He got something out of this weekend. I mean, he had to see his replacement win a bloody race. He knew at that point, basically, his career was done. But that is all she wrote for the Spanish Grand Prix in 2016. With smiles all around Red Bull, even Max Verstappen's teammate Daniel Ricciardo joined in the celebrations. I'm sure they would go on to have a great relationship. They definitely wouldn't have any spats, let's say in 2018. And Verstappen had proven himself to everyone watching around the world. And I wonder if he would live up to that expectation.